Okay, hi everyone and welcome. I think you can hear me and see me now. Welcome to this session from the GSMA Assistive Tech team on how to break the barriers for people with disabilities through innovation in Africa. My name is Michael Nick and I'm the Senior Director for the program. In the next hour also, we will discuss why mobile is such a critical element in the digital inclusion of persons with disability in Africa, but also how the technology, the mobile technologies, can trigger the development of a new generation of assistive tech. For admin purpose, I was asked to remind you that today we're using a feature called Wordly, which is an auto captioning function for translation. So I think you should have a link somewhere on your window if you need translation as well in French, I believe, for this session. So after a brief introduction, my colleague Clara Aranda will present in more details recent learnings from our research on mobile for disability, for example, how mobile disability gap exists across the world. Then my colleague Gemma James will present a new initiative we are excited about. It is called the Principles for Inclusion, and it's about driving accessibility in inclusion in the mobile industry and beyond. Then in the second half of this session, we will move to the live panel where I will be joined by three distinguished speakers who are each experts in digital entrepreneurship, innovation, and assistive technology. By the end of this session, there will be a short Q&A, so please stay with us until the end if you would like to ask a question to a panelist or to the GSMA team. But first, a brief word of introduction to our GSMA Assistive Tech program. In 2018, the United Nations published their first flagship report on disability and the Sustainable Development Goals. In the report, it was stated that persons with disabilities are at disadvantage when it comes to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. Concrete action is needed if we want to ensure that persons with disability, or 1 billion people around the world, or 50% of the global population, are both agents and beneficiaries of development. Another striking statistic comes from the World Health Organization. For the 1 billion people who need access to assistive technology, the WHO estimates that up to 90%, 90, don't have access to the assistive technology they need to live autonomous and independent lives. In a world where digital technologies and services are increasingly pervasive in our everyday lives, and we witness the relentless digitalization of many basic services in developed but also developing countries, what is the reality of digital inclusion for persons with disabilities? And how the services and the products that are reaching mass markets are developed with and for people with disabilities in mind. We see a lot of innovation reaching the market today, such as artificial intelligence, eye tracking system, natural language processing and voice commands, touchscreens, smart readers. But are these innovations really reaching those who might benefit from them the most? And are these technologies affordable for the majority of the population in Africa and beyond who might live with limited income? These were the questions we were asking ourselves at the GSMA Mobile for Development in 2018. And that's why we created the GSMA Assistive Tech program, thanks to funding from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, or FCDO, to really be able to drive greater access for mobile technologies and services for people with disabilities globally, and also maximize social and economic opportunities. So over the past 2 years, we've been active on a few fronts. The first one is on research. As my colleague Clara will mention in a minute, we've been gathering evidence and insights in multiple countries to really understand the levels of mobile ownership, access and usage of mobile phones, including smartphones, for people with disabilities. And that's how we really confirmed that a mobile disability gap existed. The second one is around engagement. We've been increasingly active in our collaboration with mobile operators to support them on their journey towards accessibility, but also inclusion. We've been working with the teams, for example, to raise awareness about the potential of mobile for inclusion, and to ensure as well that no one is left behind from accessing their mobile services. Our third activity is around advocacy. Inclusion is a collaborative action, and we look forward in the future to engaging more with government bodies to support the development of digital accessibility strategies and policies. The Principles for Inclusion is another good example of the initiative the GSMA could develop to support inclusion. And finally, we are proud to have announced earlier this month the launch of the first GSMA Innovation Fund for Assistive Tech. We are looking for startups, small and medium enterprises, or social enterprises who are looking to address some of the barriers to digital inclusion for people with disabilities. These barriers include accessibility, affordability, relevance, knowledge and skills, or safety and security. If you would like more information about the Innovation Fund, please visit our website. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Clara Aranda. Clara is our Insight Manager for the program. She has recorded our presentation where she talks in more details about the recent learnings.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our session today from wherever you are in the world. My name is Clara Aranda, and I'm an Insights Manager for the GSMA Assistive Tech program. During the past year, I have led our research to better understand the digital divide experienced by people with disabilities. This is a largely on the research topic, and we are proud to be pioneering in this field. During the past year, we have produced 4 key pieces of research. First, last year, we published a study of the mobile disability gap in Kenya and in Bangladesh. For the first time, we measured the levels of mobile ownership and usage by people with disabilities in these countries. We also conducted a case study research with mobile operators to learn about their strategies for the inclusion of people with disabilities. This year, we analyzed the data from the GSMA Intelligence Consumer Survey in 7 low and middle income countries to look at the digital inclusion of women with disabilities. And finally, we conducted a landscape study to understand the current status of digital assistive tech innovations in Africa and Asia. So, in the presentation today, I will give you a quick overview of some of our key findings from these pieces of research. Defining disability is complex, but there are 2 mainstream models often used to define it. These are the social and medical models of disability. These models provide different views about the impact of disability on well-being and the mediating role of environmental and social factors on disability. Traditionally, the medical model uses a biomedical perception of disability and sees it as a reduction in an individual's quality of life. From this model, disability is seen as a problem of the individual that needs to be treated. And it is considered that the model has led to negative views and stigma of people with disabilities. The social model of disability, on the other hand, sees disability as the outcome of the barriers surrounding an individual. It is used by disability rights advocates, and the model focuses on the external limiting factors that exclude people with disabilities, such as environmental factors, social attitudes, and organizational systems. At the heart of the social model of disability are the concepts of inclusive and universal design. This means designing for all. For people with disabilities, there are systems and products that can help them overcome some of the barriers in society and live independently. These are known as assistive technologies. I am sure you're aware of them. They include wheelchairs, hearing aids, and glasses. The systems for the provision of assistive technologies are, however, usually very complex, and in many parts of the world they do not function effectively. This means that access to assistive technologies is limited for many people. The WHO considers that only 10% of those who need assistive technologies have access to one. It is in these places, particularly in low and middle income countries, where we believe that mobile can play a significant role. Mobile phones are cost-effective tools that cluster together many assistive technologies in a single device. But the nexus between mobile and disability remains under research, but our work has started to build knowledge in this area. Our first key finding from our research is that people with disabilities are experiencing a gap in mobile ownership and usage. To give you an idea, our analysis of the GSMA Intelligence Consumer Survey 2019 found that in Kenya and Uganda, people with disabilities are 7% and 37% less likely to own a phone than non-disabled people. This gap means that more people with disabilities than non-disabled people are still missing out from the benefits of mobile. Also, gender plays a significant role in digital inclusion. From the Mobile Gender Gap Report 2020, we know that in low and middle income countries, women are 8% less likely than men to own a phone. This gap varies by region. In South Asia, for instance, the gap in ownership is 21%, while in Sub-Saharan Africa it is 13%. The reality is different for women with disabilities. Across the 7 low and middle income countries included in our analysis, we found that in most countries, women with disabilities have the lowest rates of mobile ownership. Please note that in this research, Kenya, Mexico, and Pakistan had small sample sizes for men with disabilities, so the data should be interpreted cautiously. But for us to understand the digital inclusion of women with disabilities, I'll give you a couple of examples. In Kenya and Uganda, for instance, the gender gaps in ownership are 5% and 17% respectively. But the gap between women with disabilities and men without disabilities is larger. We call this the gender and disability gap, which is 8% and 51% in each country. Our second key finding then is that disability is a significant predictor of mobile ownership, and it compounds the gender gap. The same study also shows that people with disabilities are significantly less likely to own a smartphone than non-disabled people. Kenya and Uganda, for instance, have disability gaps in smartphone ownership of 63% and 59% respectively. While their gender gaps in smartphone ownership are 21% and 17%, their gender and disability gaps are higher than 70% in each country. Mobile internet awareness and mobile internet use are key steps of digital inclusion. However, our third key finding is that there is a large gap in these stages of digital inclusion. People with disabilities, for instance, in Kenya and Uganda, are less aware of mobile internet by 30% and 51% than non-disabled people. In each country, people with disabilities are over 60% less likely to use mobile internet than non-disabled people. Women with disabilities in particular have the lowest levels of mobile internet use. For instance, in Kenya and Uganda, women with disabilities are 75% and 80% less likely to use mobile internet compared to men without disabilities. Even in countries with no gender gaps or almost no gender gaps, the differences between women with disabilities and men without disabilities is often large. For mobile to be used as an assistive technology, it is important that the handset has accessibility features. These are functions that are often embedded in a phone's software. However, from the research that we did in Kenya and in Bangladesh, our fourth key finding is that there are low levels of awareness of accessibility features and a lot of people do not know how to use them. To give you an example, we found that in Kenya, only 23% of smartphone owners with disabilities use accessibility features. Now, it is important to highlight that this proportion increases to 64% for smartphone owners with visual impairment. Through our research, we have been able to identify barriers to the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. These are, first, access. Handsets with accessibility features are not always available in the market. Also, some people do not have the necessary identification for them to be able to own a mobile. Often, people with disabilities receive a handset from a relative or a caregiver. This leads to the second type of barrier, affordability. In many parts of the world, people with disabilities do not have access to the same opportunities as non-disabled people. The UN fact sheet on disability and employment indicates that in low and middle income countries, 80% of people with disabilities in working age are unemployed. This means that for many people, mobile phones are not affordable and the cost of services can be prohibitive. Relevance is the third barrier. For many people with disabilities, their caregivers or their relatives, mobile phones are effective communication tools, but they don't see them as assistive technologies that can provide them access to opportunities. This is in part because content and products tailored to their needs are not often available. The fourth barrier is knowledge and skills, which we mentioned a little bit before. Many people do not know how to use a mobile phone, they don't know the mobile internet or accessibility features, which limits their possibility to use mobile. The final barrier is safety and security. Some people with disabilities do not consider mobile phones to be safe to use. In part, this is because some services haven't been designed for inclusion. For that reason, users with disabilities may be put at risk when using them. As an example, people with visual impairment sometimes face challenges when doing transactions with their mobile money accounts, and they can become victims of fraud. To cope with the challenges, they rely on someone they trust to do the transactions, and often they pay for help. However, even if these barriers exist, some people with disabilities are in fact power users of mobile. For instance, in Kenya, 69% of visually impaired smartphone owners use mobile internet daily, compared to 56% of non-disabled smartphone owners. This suggests that when barriers are lowered, many people can have the opportunity to be digitally included. Our research so far has allowed us to understand the mobile gaps and barriers to the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. However, the relevance of mobile as an assistive technology has been seen by innovators, and many are designing solutions to increase the participation of people with disabilities. Digital assistive tech are the applications of frontier technologies and ICTs to support people with disabilities to live independently and fully participate in society. These may or may not require a mobile phone. In a landscape study that we conducted this year, we identified 93 innovations emerging from Asia, Africa, and the MENA region. Nearly half of these innovations were identified in South and Southeast Asia. More than half of them were mobile related. Some countries in particular are active in digital assistive tech innovations, such as India, Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt. With over 40% of all innovations identified, the majority of these innovations are being designed and developed by startups. They are followed by established companies and non-for-profit organizations with 23% each. For most digital innovations, being able to provide an affordable solution or free of charge is at the core of the business. Innovators then need to be very creative on how they deploy their solutions, and they usually need to adopt a combination of business models. Some innovations, for instance, are provided directly to the users, while others target people with disabilities by providing a solution to a business, a government, or a provider of public service. Yet, cases of successful digital assistive tech innovations are still very limited, and many innovators are challenged due to the lack of funding. So today, I have presented some of the main research findings from our work. It is clear from our research that there is a risk of leaving behind people with a disability in an ever more digital world. This is particularly the case for women with disabilities. Our research aligns with what others have said. The UN Disability and Development Report states that persons with disabilities have more limited access to information and communications technology than persons without disabilities, and that there is a significant gap between persons with and without disabilities in the use of the Internet. The GSMA Assistive Tech program will continue working towards generating data and insights to advance the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. But also, we will support life-changing innovations through our Assistive Tech Innovation Fund, and we will define principles for digital inclusion to drive actions from the mobile industry. Resolving the barriers requires the work from everyone, and hopefully our research can help you to work for the digital inclusion of people with disabilities.
Can you hear me? Great. So there is a risk of digital exclusion and then further exclusion if actions are not taken to curb the challenges to digital inclusion. And as Clara mentioned, this includes, here we are, and this includes ownership, access, and usage of mobile phones. And the time is now to take these actions. So that's why we're excited today to share more about a new project that we've been working on. It's called the Principles for Inclusion. My colleague Gemma James will explain in more details what this is all about. But we have started a consultation with various stakeholders, such as mobile operators, the FCDO, and other experts in accessibility and assistive tech, to develop a series of principles for inclusion to drive accessibility and inclusion in the mobile industry and beyond.
Connectivity is critical to everyone, yet there's a segment of society that is disproportionately unconnected: people with disabilities. People with disabilities face additional barrier to inclusion and participation constructed by society, and these barriers are often exacerbated by the lack of access to affordable, relevant assistive technology. Only 1 in 10 people have access to the assistive technology they need to live independent and autonomous lives. In order to reach people with disabilities that are unconnected and provide better services for those that are connected, a global effort is needed to create a significant shift in how people with disabilities are reached and included. Ensuring digital inclusion is critical and requires informed action for all stakeholders to address the barriers faced by people with disabilities and to meet their needs. In order to operationalise how to do this, the GSMA, in conjunction with mobile operators and disability and accessibility experts, have developed a set of principles to advance the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. The principles are set around three main areas of focus. The first one is embracing disability inclusion at every level of the organisation. The second, collecting data and insights in order to understand how to reach and better serve people with disabilities. And the third, delivering inclusive products and services that meet the varied needs of people with disabilities. Through these principles, action will be taken to address the barriers and aspirations of people with disabilities, drive innovation, and realise the social and commercial opportunity of reaching this underserved segment of the population.
Why is it important to ensure the digital inclusion of people with disabilities?
As a blind person, I strongly believe disability is not the outcome of an impairment. Actually, it's not a body-related issue. It's the direct consequence of social barriers. So we should focus on removing those barriers, making us disabilized.
It is very important to include people with disabilities digitally. If societies are going to prosper, it has to be done in an equitable and inclusive manner.
Digital inclusion, which is something that we take very seriously, and not just on disability, but whether it's on gender, language, whether it is groups of the population that may not otherwise have fully understood the best they can get out of technology.
We give quite importance to digital inclusion for disabled people to overcome those barriers with the power of our technologies, like indoor navigation and audio description for blind people, instant sign language translator for deaf people, educational game for children with autism, and technology classes in special education schools for the children with different type of disabilities.
Thanks to adapted or dedicated devices, customized user interfaces, and specific human-machine interactions. We are also engaging our ecosystem of suppliers to propose digital solutions and assistive technologies for disabled people.
And of course, for these users, it helps them overcome many of the daily struggles and challenges that you and I may not always understand, but these simple tools can give them so much greater ability to overcome those challenges.
What are the benefits for people with disabilities and your organisation?
It is great to have a diverse group of employees, obviously, because you gain insights and you're able to share experiences, and it makes a company definitely perform much better. And also, it kind of accelerates that innovation mindset, because people start looking at everything, and so they start to think how they can improve life, not only for themselves and for others, but it changes the equation of the employees.
Digital inclusion is something we take very seriously and work towards enabling those parts of the population get the most out of our technologies. Sometimes it also means adapting our technologies to suit them best. The Atru Mitru app is something that we developed around 2018, which is something for people with cerebral palsy, strokes, any other kind of speech impairment, to communicate with their loved ones or caregivers. It's a very simple app, and we have seen a steady growth in the number of users for that app.
Orange provides dedicated solutions adapted to elderly people or people with disabilities through a dedicated website, Autonomie avec Orange, where, for example, dedicated smartphones are provided for simplified calls and internet access. The customer relation is adapted for customers with hearing or view issues that can use videos with sign language or access billing in braille and large characters. Open source Orange dedicated solutions makes it easier to browse online, find accessible websites and adapt them to the individual needs.
I think it's a win-win situation for both people with disabilities and organizations to include them, to bring them onto the equation, for them to be part of the process in creating new products and services, but also in helping companies be inclusive.
Why are the GSMA's principles for driving digital inclusion for people with disabilities important?
The GSMA principles for people with disabilities are really important because when you look at the ecosystem, all of the mobile operators that we have around the world, it should be one unified concept because the reach that mobile operators have is tremendous. So I think it's agreeing upon the principles, making sure that we do as an industry, do the best that we can to really include people with disability, really address them and make them part of the equation is a great step forward from the GSMA.
And other contributors mentioned in the video, we strongly believe in the development of the principles. So we will keep you informed about the development of the principles in the next weeks and months. But now, before we move to the panel, we have a very short video, the last video of today, which is coming from Vodafone in Ghana, where now Andrews explains how to develop their dedicated customer service for hearing impaired customers.
Hi, at Vodafone, we believe that our purpose is to make sure that we promote inclusion for all, regardless of race, gender, age, and also disability. And it's for this reason that we created Supercare. Supercare was a product that we designed for our hearing impaired and speech impaired customers. It was a bundle that allowed them to be able to communicate with their friends and their loved ones and live an extremely positive life. It also meant that we had to train our colleagues in the Experience Centre, but also in retail in less than 3 weeks, to make sure that if any of our hearing impaired or speech impaired customers called, that we would be able to video call and also sign back to them. This for us was a Ghana first. It has never been done, and we're really, really proud of our achievements. We didn't just do it for commercial reasons. The commercial benefits are obvious. You make sure that you touch a wider base and you leave no one behind. So the more customers that you include, the more that you're able to bring people on board to the Vodafone family. But more than that, it was about making sure that no one was left behind. And that was really important for Vodafone Ghana. So not everything went as smoothly. One of the things that we always had to keep on reminding ourselves is that we have to make sure that the devices that we bring into the country are accessible for all. We also need to make sure that when we create and introduce new technologies, be it AI, robotics, big data, we have to remember that we have persons with disabilities in our communities that we also have to design for and make sure that is done right at the core of the design of a product. We're really excited about all the great things that Supercare has been able to bring not only to Vodafone Ghana, but to our customers and the community and the Ghanaian society at large. We hope it continues. We're really excited about more innovations coming. Thank you very much for including us today, and we look forward to many, many more years of Supercare. Thank you.
Now on to the panel for a session. I am pleased to welcome 3 speakers that are joining me for a virtual panel. I will let Irene, Farida, and Bernard introduce themselves in a minute. Our discussion today will focus around the themes of digital inclusion, accessibility, and mobile innovation for assistive tech. So first, Irene Mbari-Kirika. Irene, could you please introduce yourself and your organization, please?
Excellent, thank you. My name is Irene Mbari-Kirika. I'm the founder and executive director of inABLE. inABLE is a nonprofit organization based in Kenya and Washington, DC, with a very simple mission to empower the blind and visually impaired through technology. So accessibility is at the heart of everything we do. And so far, we've been able to train more than 8,000 blind and low vision students and teachers on computer-assisted technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. Next, we have Farida Bedwei.
Thank you. My name is Farida Bedwei. I am a software engineer by profession, and I have a fintech company which develops banking solutions for the microfinance industry. I have a disability myself, so I guess you could say that I'm more or less an AT user. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Farida. And finally, we have Bernard Chiira. Bernard.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bernard Chiira. I work with the Global Disability Innovation Hub and AMREF Health Africa, where we are running Innovate Now, which is Africa's first assistive technology accelerator. And this is actually part of a larger project called AT 2030, led by the Global Disability Innovation Hub, with a simple mission of making assistive technology accessible to all. And pleasure to be here.
Thanks, everyone. To start with, as a first question for the group, so in the light of the COVID crisis, we've seen that digital platforms and products are critical to ensure that no one is left behind. Fortunately, for many people with disabilities, we know that there are systemic barriers to usage, such as we mentioned, accessibility, affordability, awareness, and knowledge on how to use these tools. So they can get access to timely and critical information and services. So from your perspective, what should be the priority to solve the main challenges to digital inclusion for people with disabilities, and to ensure that the digitalization of services is not leading to further exclusion? Could we start with you, Irene?
Okay. So first, I think, yes, innovation is one of the solutions that we can use to address digital barriers, but we have to remember that people with disabilities have to be at the heart of innovations. First, we have to make sure that we bring people with disability into the discussion. They need to be part of every process. We need to understand their needs. We cannot design for a community that we don't even understand. So the other thing that I think is very critical is that businesses need to make a very conscious effort to understand digital accessibility and what impact it has on their products and services. Only then will we start seeing proper commitment and investment in the digital accessibility space, because then it will be connecting them directly to a market, the 15% of the global population that people are not tapping into at this point.
Thanks, Irene. Farida, could you share your thoughts about this question?
Well, I think that as Irene said, you cannot have a conversation about people without including the people. And in the past, we have been excluded from virtually any conversation regarding us, be it health, be it mobile technology, be it even the social system. They talk about us, but they don't talk to us. They don't ask us what we need or what we don't need. So, for instance, using myself as an example, when the smartphones and the touch screens first came into play, I had difficulty using the touch screens because of my disability, which is cerebral palsy. So obviously my movements are not very accurate and all. But what I've realized is that those of us with disabilities are one of the most adaptable creatures on this earth. We adapt to various situations because as they said in one of the previous presentations, we are thrust into a world which hasn't been made for us. So we have to adapt to whatever situation we find ourselves. Now, the good thing about COVID, if there's anything good about it, is that organizations have realized that remote work is possible, and people can be as productive remotely as they can being in the offices. So right now, it opens up the door for more people with disabilities to get jobs because physical access used to be a big barrier to people with disabilities who wanted to work. I mean, I have a company, for instance, but honestly, I'm ashamed to say that for a long time, my office wasn't even disabled friendly, although I have a disability because the structure of the offices of the buildings in this part of the world are not built with people with disabilities in mind. So every day when I go to the office, I have to struggle to climb the stairs. Luckily for me, I use crutches. But if somebody with a wheelchair wanted to come and work for me, it wouldn't have been possible. So COVID has opened their eyes to the world that people with disabilities and people without disabilities could work remotely. And I think it is even right now when you're hiring somebody, you really don't need to ask whether the person has a disability or not, as long as the person is able to work remotely and do the job.
Thanks, Farida, for your contribution. In all the doom and gloom of the COVID crisis, as you say, maybe there are positive outcomes coming from the crisis. It's good to pick that up, actually, as a great maybe equalizer, hopefully. Now, Bernard, could you share your thoughts as well on that question?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I think Irene and Farida have covered this really well. I think the only thing I would add is really one on the involvement of persons with disability. I think one of the I would say mindsets that need to change is to start looking at persons with disability not just as beneficiaries or people who need help. They are actually solution providers themselves. I mean, Farida mentioned the extreme high level of adaptability that we have, and I think the aspect of creating opportunities for persons with disability to access leadership and be in decision-making positions is a one aspect that I would really emphasize. And I think the other thing I would add is really when we look at the digital economy, as it were, it is powered or driven by, especially in Africa, a rapidly digitizing society. And I feel like, when you talk about digital accessibility in the developer circles, or actually software developers, very few of them are actually, thinking that this is an important topic or a requirement. I think in terms of standards for any digital platform, especially that is being consumed by the public, needs to be, very focused on digital accessibility. And I think policy could help here, but as well as education. I think the idea for universal design as a topic in education needs to be part of, the entire, learning or education system, right from kindergarten to university. Thank you.
Just as a quick follow-up question on that, Bernard, do you see a shift happening in terms of how user-centric design or universal design are being increasingly used, part of like different courses, as you were saying, or like from the private sector?
Yeah, I think one example I can give is actually part of the work that we are doing. So we run an accelerator program that is meant to support entrepreneurs and innovators that are providing solutions, assistive technology solutions in Africa. And one of the things we've done, and it's a core part of our program, is a component we call the Live Lab, which is literally working with sensitivity from the beginning. So if an entrepreneur, for example, is admitted in our program, part of the deliverables and part of the evidence they have to show is that from the design phase, they actually engaged the disabled people, and they actually got feedback, and they actually tested whatever they were building with persons with disability. And I think that's a principle or an aspect that can really be applied across board, not just in accelerator programs. I think one of the avenues that this would be really useful, for example, is designing interventions for reaching persons with disability. And we've seen this during COVID, where governments have been required to come up with solutions to cushion the society against COVID. And I think one of the great examples, like in Kenya, the Ministry of Health actually formed a technical committee that was led by persons with disability to advise on how the interventions, the government interventions, can actually reach persons with disability at the grassroots. And I think this model can be used in public sector, in private sector, in education, across board. And I think we now have technology. We've, through COVID, gotten evidence that persons with disability are actually great users of technology and they can participate. And I think that is where we need to capitalize and come out of COVID, having transformed in many ways to include persons with disability.
Again, we're coming back to the positive outcome of the COVID crisis, unfortunately. Coming back to you, Irene. So the organization you're leading, inABLE, so related to the theme of education and coding skills as well. So inABLE presents its vision as contributing to create a world where disability is not inability. Community where individuals with disabilities have the same access to the same educational, technological, and employment opportunities as the non-disabled. You mentioned it briefly in your introduction, but could you share a bit more about the impact of inABLE and why you chose to focus on teaching computer skills to blind and visually impaired students in Kenya?
Thank you. So when we started off, we realized there was a gap between the blind and the rest of the world. And what was happening is that people who are blind were graduating with Braille skills for very many years. And that's still going on in Africa. And then what you find, they're joining a world that's completely oblivious to Braille, meaning you can't employ them. Half the time when they join higher education, they cannot access content. Yet we are living in a digital time. So we ended up just starting a simple computer program to teach people with disabilities, especially the blind, basic computer skills, because we realized that they need to first familiarize themselves with the device. They need to master the keyboard. They need to learn how to use assistive technology software, and then they can be able to learn about the different applications that they can access online. All that is a process. And if you invest in that piece of training, what you end up with is, number one, you end up to connecting these kids to the rest of the world, because first they were disconnected. Number two, they are able to independently and confidently access information without having to rely on anyone, meaning that they can pursue higher education, they can get into employment, because once they have the basic computer skills, All they need to be taught by employers is about their products to be able to perform like everybody else. And I think Farida is a living testament, because I always say if they have the basic computer skills, some of them want to become designers and developers so that they can participate in the development of the innovations we are talking about. Because these innovations cannot only be developed by people without disabilities. People with disabilities need to be at the heart of this. So I think what needs to happen today is investors, donors, and businesses need to understand the power in a person with a disability and make a very, very critical investment in digital skills training for people with disabilities. Because once you do that, you set them free, and they also become your future customers because they can access information, they can use your products and services. So that's why we started inABLE, so that these kids can be independent and they can participate in the modern economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Irene. And it's about sharing those stories of success as well, and how role models emerge. And that's a good segue for your question, Farida. I was wondering if you could share a bit more about your journey as a digital entrepreneur in Ghana. How did you acquire the skills that you use in your everyday life to create your venture as well? And what kind of challenges did you face in your journey as well?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, I have cerebral palsy, and it affected my ability to write. So I started using the manual typewriter at a very early age to be able to do my schoolwork and to be able to write letters and all. We are talking about the early 80s, before computers became affordable and accessible in homes. So gradually, as computers became more affordable, I graduated to a computer, and there used to be something called a home computer. We just had 3 programs: word processing and the GW basic language. So I started playing around the GW basic language, and at the age of 7, I wrote my first program, and that is when I realized my love for programming. So after we came to Ghana, because prior to that, I grew up around the world. I grew up in the Caribbean, in Britain, and other countries. So we came to Ghana when I was 9 years old, and I had to go into mainstream school for the first time. Prior to that, I was homeschooled by my mother. Then I went into mainstream school for 3 years. I did very well, but the senior high schools were not accessible, and they are still not accessible. So I had to go and do a diploma in IT because of my natural affinity for computing. It was decided that I might as well just go and start a career in it. So at the age of 16, I started my formal education in IT. So I did a diploma in IT. Then I started working at the age of 17 because I realized that the field that I was in, I needed hands-on experience, because I mean, when it comes to programming, the best teacher is your work, because you cannot envisage all the real life scenarios that you'll encounter in your work environment. So I decided to start working. So I started working, then I did 2 other diplomas in IT, got admission into the University of Hertfordshire in the UK to go directly into final year, graduated after 1 year, came back and started working, came back and continued working. Then at the end of 2011, there was this opportunity to set up an IT company which built financial solutions to promote financial inclusion, because that's something that I'm very passionate about. Because when you're living in an economy where there are very few people who have bank accounts or who are not included into the financial space, it's very difficult for you to roll out any services or products, because there are not that many people with the spending power. So that is, so in a nutshell, that has been my journey. But with regard to the employment of any assistive technology or device or anything, I did not have the privilege of having access to any assistive technology, because when I was starting my journey, they were not available. And sometimes I think it was better for me, because it made me learn how to do things that in a normal circumstances I wouldn't have learned. As I said, when I started using the smartphone, the touch screen was very difficult for me, because prior to the introduction of the touch screen, there were those phones with the properly defined keypad, which made it very easy to tap the keys and all. But with the smartphones, it becomes something else. Now, one thing that I like to add is that usually when people are talking about disability access and all, there are various disabilities. Not everybody's disability needs are the same. So we have to appreciate that my needs are different from Bernard's needs, or somebody with visual impairment. So whatever technology you are deploying, you have to get the people who you are deploying it for, and get their input. Very important.
Coming back to the point you were making around understanding as well, a customer with different abilities, so you can design products with them and for them in mind. And it's not a binary of like having disability or not. Actually, it's like all the nuances between them. But thanks, Farida, for sharing about your journey. I'm conscious that we close to the end of the session. So actually, I would go to the Q&A now to have a look if there is anything. So Kim is asking a question. So Bernard, you mentioned a great point on including persons with disabilities as leaders of innovation. How do you see this happening more effectively, formally in business? Who and what should drive this?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kim. And I think it's a very fundamental question. But I think when you talk about leadership, it's one of those aspects I believe that needs to be nurtured from a very young age. So I feel that the first, community that needs to be empowered to help, persons with disability to believe in themselves and actually acquire leadership traits is the family level. So parents and guardians. And I think one of the most difficult situations in low and middle income countries is that a lot of parents are disenfranchised by poverty and are thus not able to provide their kids with these opportunities. But I think where this has been done, I mean, the results are, there to be seen for all. I think for myself and Farida, we can testify that family support from a very young age is the one that gave us the confidence to be where we are here. But nevertheless, having said that, I think that responsibility becomes cascaded, across all levels of life. So in school, teachers and educators, they take on the baton from the parents, and they have a responsibility to ensure that kids with disabilities in school can participate in leadership across sports, across all levels. And I think most importantly, when it comes to employers and the business world, the great responsibility lies here with every organization, and I feel like it's a matter of, first of all, enabling the access. I think most employers, when it comes to disability, they are not very accessible. And then internally, it's actually looking at merit and trying to create an enabling environment. And I think once those barriers are broken, the rest, persons with disability have always risen to the challenge to prove the world wrong. Thank you.
Thanks for your thoughts, Bernard. Irene and Farida, do you have any other quick insights to add to Bernard's words?
I think what he said was true, and I mean when it comes to the role of society, it's very important for people to realize that people with disabilities are just like everybody else. It's mainly the society and the environment that disables us more than our actual disability. Because I always use when you go to a disabled adapted room for as an instance, as an example, because everything is at wheelchair level. So those of us who are upright, now you have to bend to do everything, and it is inconvenient for us. In the same way, people with disabilities who are in an environment where everything is higher than them, it is inconvenient for them. So it's a matter of just realizing that people have different needs, and society has to adapt, whether using technology or whatever, to those needs. And I think at the end of the day, when people realize that people with disabilities can also become very high levels consumers of their services and all, because let's face it, at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. Whether you want to admit it or not, businesses are the business to make money. So it's like, why should I spend money on these people when I'm not going to get a return on my investment? So if you can convince them that we have the spending power, I think more businesses and more organizations would be willing to adapt their services for our needs.
Thanks, Farida. Irene, do you have a quick word of conclusion to add to that?
Yes, I think in terms of leadership, I believe that this conversation of digital inclusion, digital accessibility has to start with the leaders with the executives in every business. And I think if they realize 80 million Africans are living with disabilities today, that's a potential market. So one of the best ways they can address the issue is making sure that they set up digital accessibility teams within their organizations, and making sure that these teams are made up of people with disabilities who address the issues of accessibility, and they report directly to the leadership so that the leadership can allocate the right budget and the right approvals to avoid going through the bureaucracy within every institution. At the same time, I do believe the conversation about digital accessibility needs to continue, and we need to push very hard, both at work, in education, in every sector. So on our side as inABLE is hosting the Inclusive Africa Conference next week, October 8th and 9th, and the focus is on digital accessibility in Africa. So I hope people can join us to continue with the conversation. Thank you so much.
The conversation is only starting. So yeah, please join us in this digital accessibility revolution. We're already reaching the end of the session, which is unfortunate. But so please join me in virtually thanking our panelists and all the contributors to this session. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. So please feel free to get in touch with the GSMA team or visit the website on gsmaassistivetech.com, GSMA Assistive Tech, for more information about our activities. Thank you for joining, and bye for now.